The world doesn't end with a bang. It ends in a quiet, beige-walled consultation room at Houston Methodist, under the hum of fluorescent lights, with a sentence so casually delivered it rips the air from your lungs before you even realize you've been struck. "I just wanted a quick word, Sophia. Privately." Dr. Harris's voice was gentle, the same calm tone she'd used moments before while gliding the ultrasound wand over my daughter-in-law Lucy's swollen belly. I had been sitting in the corner playing the part of the proud, supportive matriarch, my heart swelling at the grainy black and white image of my first grandchild, my son Rob's child, a new Monroe, the continuation of a legacy I had spent 40 years building. I smiled, nodded, and followed the doctor out, leaving Lucy happily scrolling through the printed sonogram photos, oblivious. The door clicked shut, muffling the sounds of the bustling clinic, and the silence in the small office felt suddenly heavy, pressing in on me. Dr. Harris gestured to a chair, but she didn't sit. She leaned against her desk, her expression no longer one of professional warmth, but of deep, clinical concern. "Is everything okay with the baby?" I asked, my purse clutched in my lap. My mind was already cataloging potential issues, preparing to be the rock, the fixer, the one who handled things. "The baby is perfectly healthy," she said, and I felt a wave of relief. It was a short-lived reprieve. "But there's a discrepancy. It's a delicate matter." I waited. Doctors are always delicate. It's their job. She took a careful breath. Lucy confirmed her last cycle, and the likely conception dates with me. We also have the fetal measurements, which are very precise. The timing is quite clear. She paused, her eyes meeting mine with an unmistakable look of pity. "The issue is, according to the records you provided, your son Rob was on a business trip to Singapore during the entire conception window." The words hung in the air, buzzing like trapped insects. For a moment, my brain refused to process them. It tried to find an error, a simple explanation, a miscalculation, a clerical mistake. "That can't be right," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the sudden cold dread coiling in my stomach. "Rob travels frequently. Perhaps Lucy got the dates wrong. It can be confusing." "I've already double-checked with her," Dr. Harris said softly. She was very certain. "The conception window falls squarely between March 10th and March 15th of this year. March 10th to March 15th. The date slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Rob was in Singapore. I knew this because I had helped my husband, Frank, book the celebratory dinner for his return on the 20th. Rob had been gone for 2 full weeks. There was no overlap, no possibility, no mistake. My life, as I knew it, ended in that sterile, beige-walled office. My 40-year marriage, my relationship with my son, the very foundation of my family, it was all revealed as a lie, a carefully constructed illusion I had willingly inhabited. It's a story of betrayal so deep it almost feels unreal, a story I have to share. But before we continue, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We're really happy to know that our stories have reached people everywhere. My blood ran cold, and the hum of the lights overhead seemed to grow into a roar. The doctor was still talking, her voice a distant, meaningless drone. My mind was no longer in that room. It was back home, sifting through the last 6 months with a horrifying new clarity. If Rob wasn't the father, then who was? The conception window, March 10th to March 15th. Rob was in Singapore, and my husband Frank was home. Frank, who had been working from his home office. Frank, who had been unusually solicitous of Lucy, insisting she not trouble herself with errands while Rob was away. Frank, who had laughed it off when I mentioned how much time they were spending together, saying he was just practicing being a grandpa. The doctor's voice cut through the fog. "Sophia, are you all right?" I blinked, my focus returning to her face, a mask of professional empathy. My own face felt like a porcelain mask that was about to crack. I could feel the fissures spreading from the inside out, but I held it together. I had to. Yes, I managed, the word feeling like sand in my mouth. Thank you for your discretion, doctor. It must be a mistake. I'll speak with the family. It wasn't a mistake. I knew it with a certainty that was absolute and soul-crushing. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was a plan. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I walked to the door, placed my hand on the cool metal of the handle, and took a deep, silent breath. On the other side of that door was Lucy, holding the picture of a baby, her baby, and Frank's. A child they were planning to pass off as my grandson, a cuckoo in the nest I had built, designed to secure their future and destroy mine. My hand didn't tremble as I turned the knob. My face, when I smiled at Lucy, was a perfect imitation of the woman I had been 10 minutes ago. "Everything's fine, dear," I said, my voice a marvel of control. "Just a quick question about family medical history. Are you ready to go get some lunch?" She beamed, completely unaware of the abyss that had just opened beneath our feet. "I'd love that," she said. As I walked beside her down the long, sterile corridor, the image of my husband's face swam before my eyes. Not the face of the man I had loved for 4 decades, but the face of a stranger, a conspirator. And in that moment, the grief had not yet hit. All I felt was the chilling, terrifying calm of absolute realization. The game was on, and they had no idea I was now a player. The lunch was an exercise in masterful deception, a performance that deserved an award I never wanted. We sat at a corner table at La Griglia, the white tablecloth a pristine battlefield between us. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the cheerful chatter of Houston's elite, every laugh and clinking glass a jarring counterpoint to the silent scream building inside my chest. Lucy, radiant and flush with a maternal glow that was now grotesque to me, detailed her plans for the nursery. She spoke of color palettes, soft sages, and gentle creams, and debated the merits of different brands of strollers, all while I nodded and smiled, my mind a million miles away, replaying Dr. Harris's words on a torturous loop. March 10th to March 15th. Rob was in Singapore. Frank was home. "I was thinking we could name him after Frank's father if it's a boy," Lucy said, taking a delicate sip of her iced tea. "Robert Franklin Monroe. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? It honors both sides of the family." My smile felt brittle, like a piece of glass about to shatter. "That's a lovely sentiment, dear," I replied, my voice even. Inside, I was choking. Honors both sides of the family. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't honoring a grandfather. She was naming the child after his own father, hiding the truth in plain sight with a sickeningly clever twist. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a masterpiece of manipulation, and I was the intended, adoring audience. Every word she spoke was now filtered through the horrifying new lens of truth. Her casual mentions of Frank's help around the house, his insistence on cooking for her while Rob was away, his fatherly advice, it was all recast. The gestures I had once seen as kind and supportive were now the calculated actions of a co-conspirator. They weren't building a family, they were executing a hostile takeover of mine. I watched her as she talked, truly watched her for the first time. The way her eyes would flicker with something sharp and calculating before softening into a practiced look of innocence. The subtle confidence in her posture. The posture of a woman who believes she has already won. How had I missed this? Had I been so blinded by my desire for a happy, cohesive family that I had ignored the vipers I'd welcomed into my own home? The answer was a bitter, resounding yes. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets that now felt alien. I dropped Lucy at the house she shared with my son, the house I had given them as a wedding gift, and watched her walk up the path, one hand resting proprietorially on her swollen belly. She turned and waved, a perfect portrait of the dutiful, loving daughter-in-law. I waved back, the motion mechanical, before pulling away. The moment I turned the corner, the mask crumbled. A dry, ragged sob escaped my lips, a sound of pure agony. It wasn't just the affair. An affair is a wound, a deep and painful one, but it is a wound that can, in time, scar over. This was something else entirely. This was a demolition. This was 40 years of my life, of my love and trust and sacrifice, being systematically dismantled by the two people I should have been able to trust the most, my husband and the woman my son loved. When I pulled into the circular driveway of my own home in River Oaks, the house I had shared with Frank for decades, it no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, a meticulously designed set for a long-running play, where I was the only person who didn't know her lines were a lie. I walked through the heavy oak doors into the grand foyer. To my left, the sweeping staircase. To my right, the formal living room, and on the polished mahogany table against the far wall, a gallery of silver-framed photographs chronicling our lives, our wedding day. Me young and hopeful, Frank handsome and beaming, pictures of Rob's childhood first steps, little league games, high school graduation, and then the newer photos. Rob and Lucy's engagement portrait, a picture from their wedding day where Frank stood beside Lucy, his hand on the small of her back, a look on his face I had once mistaken for fatherly pride. Now I saw it for what it was, possession. The illusion didn't just crack, it atomized. It was as if a black light had been switched on, revealing the filthy hidden stains on every surface of my life. 1,000 tiny memories, 1,000 insignificant moments I had brushed aside, now flew at me like shrapnel. There was the domino effect of realization, each memory falling and knocking over the next, creating a cascade of horror. Domino 1, Frank's sudden, intense interest in estate planning, about 8 months ago. He'd come to me with a folder full of documents prepared by a new lawyer I'd never met. "Just tidying things up for the future, Sophia," he'd said, his voice smooth as honey, "making sure Rob and Lucy are taken care of, making things simple for when the baby arrives." He had framed it as an act of love, of responsible planning. I now understood he was trying to legally reposition my assets, to create a structure where he and Lucy would have more control, using their unborn child as the emotional leverage. Domino 2, the gifts. The jewelry purchases on the credit card statements that I'd assumed were for me, for some future anniversary or birthday surprise that never materialized. A delicate diamond tennis bracelet from Zadok Jewelers. A pair of emerald earrings from a boutique in the Galleria. I remembered asking him about a specific charge, and he'd waved it off. "Just a business expense, darling. Entertaining clients." I now pictured that bracelet on Lucy's wrist, hidden under the sleeve of a sweater. I pictured those earrings sparkling in her ears during a private dinner with my husband. Domino 3, their shared language. The inside jokes I was never privy to. The whispered conversations in the kitchen that would abruptly stop the moment I walked in. The way they would look at each other across a crowded dinner table, a quick, knowing glance that held a universe of secrets. I had told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. It is a particular kind of madness to doubt your own intuition, to let yourself be convinced that the smoke you see is just a trick of the light. Domino 4, the money. The way Frank had gently suggested he take over managing the operating accounts for the rental properties, citing my need to relax and enjoy life. He'd said, "You've worked so hard, Sophia. Let me handle the tedious stuff." I, fool that I was, had been grateful. I had seen it as him finally stepping up, allowing me to rest. Now I saw it as him seizing the purse strings, gaining access to the cash flow I had built from the ground up. This baby wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. It was a living, breathing claim ticket on my $30 million fortune. They weren't just having an affair, they were building a dynasty on the ruins of my own. They had looked at me. at Sophia Monroe, the woman who had negotiated the deals, managed the tenants, and balanced the books for 4 decades, and they had seen nothing but an obstacle, an aging woman to be managed, placated, and eventually dispossessed. The old woman, as I was sure Lucy thought of me, a walking vault whose combination they were trying to crack. I sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, the cold marble seeping through my clothes. The grief finally hit me then, a physical, crushing weight that bent my spine and stole the air from my lungs. It was the grief for the man I thought I had married, the partner I thought I had. It was the grief for the family I thought I had built, a family that turned out to be nothing more than a collection of predators and their prey. I had poured my entire life into Frank and Rob, into this idea of a perfect, successful family. I had celebrated Frank's vision in public while I did the grueling work in private. I had handed him the credit, the accolades, the reputation, because I believed we were a team. But we were never a team. It had always been his name on the newspaper articles about our business successes, his voice in the interviews, his face at the charity galas. I was the silent partner, the invisible engine running the whole machine, and they had become so used to my silence, so comfortable with my invisibility, that they believed I had no power. They had made the fatal mistake of confusing my quiet competence with weakness. They thought the engine would just keep running, even as they siphoned off the fuel for themselves. I sat there for what felt like hours as the afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, tracing patterns on the floor. The tears came and went, hot and furious, then cold and desolate. But as dusk began to settle, painting the grand foyer in shades of gray and purple, something else began to rise from the ashes of my grief. It was a cold, hard resolve. The 40-year illusion had cracked. Yes, it lay in a million pieces at my feet, but I was not broken. The woman who had built an empire from nothing was still here. The woman with the sharp mind for numbers and an even sharper instinct for survival had just been awakened from a long, foolish sleep. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my love for stupidity and my trust for blindness. They believed their plan was foolproof because they believed I was a fool. I pushed myself up from the marble step, my back straight, my hands steady. The tears were gone. My face was a calm, determined mask. They wanted my estate. They wanted to secure their future. I walked into my study, closed the door, and sat behind the large mahogany desk that Frank so proudly called his own. I would let them have their little fantasy for a while longer. I would let them believe their plan was proceeding perfectly. But their great love story was about to have a new chapter, and this one would be written by me. I sat behind Frank's mahogany desk, the one he called his command center, his empire's nerve. He loved to posture here, leaning back in the oversized leather chair, cigar smoke curling towards the high ceiling as he pontificated on market trends, or the brilliance of his latest acquisition. He saw himself as the visionary, the deal closer, the public face of Monroe Properties. I, apparently, was the loyal, quiet wife who kept the home fires burning, occasionally offering a supportive nod when his pronouncements became particularly grandiloquent. The irony now was a bitter taste in my mouth. This wasn't Frank's desk, it was my desk. This wasn't Frank's empire, it was mine. He was merely the gilded figurehead, the polished brass plate on a door behind which I toiled in the shadows. And as the last vestiges of daylight faded from the study windows, casting long, familiar shadows across shelves filled with books I had actually read and awards he had accepted, I began to see my life's work with a clarity that was both devastating and empowering. I closed my eyes, letting the years unspool, a silent movie playing in the theater of my mind. It didn't start with grand designs, but with necessity and a seed of ambition planted by my late father. Sophia, he'd always told me, a pragmatic man with dirt under his fingernails and wisdom in his eyes, money isn't about being rich, it's about being free. And to be truly free, you have to build your own cage, or rather, your own castle. He left me a modest inheritance, just enough to start if one was daring enough to see opportunity where others saw only risk. Frank back then was all charm and bluster, a natural salesman with an infectious laugh. He was great at opening doors, making connections, selling an idea. But he wasn't a builder. He saw the shiny, finished product, never the grime of the construction site. He saw the headlines, never the endless spreadsheets. It was a partnership, I'd told myself for decades. He was the front man. I was the engine. I believed in the division of labor, in complementary strengths. I believed it until the doctor's words shattered that comfortable delusion. Our first real foray into real estate began not in Houston, but in Austin, a city then on the cusp of its tech boom. Frank had heard whispers of a mixed-use development opportunity in a quirky, up-and-coming neighborhood, ripe for revitalization. He'd brought me the glossy brochures, full of artist renderings and ambitious projections. "Sophia, darling, imagine the potential," he'd exclaimed, waving his hands expansively. He painted a picture of trendy cafes, boutique shops, and sleek residential units, a true gem. He was excited by the vision. I was excited by the numbers. While Frank was out charming potential investors and schmoozing with city council members at expensive luncheons, I was poring over zoning laws, architectural plans, and demographic reports. I learned the language of permits and easements, the nuances of property tax assessments, the labyrinthine process of securing construction loans. I spent sleepless nights hunched over spreadsheets, calculating ROI, projecting rental yields, stress testing every variable. I taught myself commercial real estate law, devouring textbooks and attending evening seminars, because I instinctively distrusted leaving such critical details entirely to others. The Austin project wasn't just a building, it was my crucible. I negotiated with contractors, mediated disputes between architects and engineers, even redesigned floor plans myself to maximize usable space and tenant appeal. I met with prospective business owners, understanding their needs, crafting leases that were both fair and profitable. Frank, meanwhile, would sweep in for the grand moments, the groundbreaking ceremony with an oversized shovel, the ribbon cutting with a practiced smile, the lavish launch party where he would regale guests with stories of his visionary insight. He'd accept the accolades, the handshakes, the pats on the back, while I stood discreetly in the background, a ghost in my own triumph, feeling a quiet, deep satisfaction that was enough for me at the time. The mixed-use building in Austin, with its vibrant ground-floor retail and fully occupied upper-level apartments, became the cornerstone of our portfolio, collectively worth an estimated $8 million by itself. Frank called it his stroke of genius. I called it 20,000 hours of my life. From there, we expanded. Frank wanted to leverage our success into what he called more accessible markets. He meant less hands-on work for him, more opportunities for grand pronouncements. I, however, saw the potential instability and consistent cash flow. I turned my attention to the Woodlands, a master-planned community north of Houston, perfect for family rentals. These weren't sexy projects. There were no flashy ribbon cuttings. Instead, there were late-night calls about leaky pipes, meticulously drafted tenant agreements, and the endless dance of managing property taxes and insurance policies. I handled every aspect, screening tenants, coordinating maintenance schedules, ensuring timely rent collection, and meticulously tracking every penny of expenditure and income. I learned the intricacies of landlord-tenant law, built relationships with reliable plumbers and electricians, and even personally oversaw minor renovations between tenants to ensure our properties commanded top dollar. Frank's involvement in the Woodlands? He'd drive through occasionally, pointing out our beautiful homes to friends on the golf course. "Solid investments, darling. A real annuity," he'd tell me, as if he'd simply waved a magic wand and conjured them into existence. He never once spoke to a tenant, never coordinated a repair, never reconciled a single bank statement for these properties. Yet in every social gathering, he'd confidently declare himself a diversified real estate investor with a portfolio of high-yield residential properties. These rental homes, meticulously managed and consistently profitable under my careful eye, grew to represent another $12 million in assets. My ambition, however, wasn't satisfied with merely maintaining. I saw an opportunity for scale. My next venture was a small apartment complex in San Antonio. It was a distressed property when I acquired it, a diamond in the rough that Frank dismissed as, "Too much trouble, Sophia, darling." But I saw the bones, the location, the underserved market. This was my biggest challenge yet. I oversaw the complete renovation, from structural repairs to interior finishes, sourcing materials, negotiating with tradesmen, and even designing the landscaping. I immersed myself in the San Antonio market, understanding local demographics, crafting marketing campaigns to attract a diverse tenant base, and implementing professional property management software to streamline operations. The transformation was immense. What had been a dilapidated block of units became a thriving community, fully leased and generating robust profits. It was an arduous, exhausting process, requiring every ounce of my intelligence and tenacity. Frank came to the grand reopening, of course, where he cut a ceremonial ribbon and gave an impassioned speech about vision and community betterment. He then took a congratulatory golf trip with his cronies, leaving me to handle the inevitable punch list of post-renovation issues. That apartment complex, my true labor of love and grit, now accounted for approximately $10 million of our holdings. Collectively, my real estate portfolio, the Austin mixed use, the Woodlands rentals, the San Antonio apartments, was worth about $30 million. And every single dollar of that had Sophia Monroe's fingerprints on it. Her late nights, her calculations, her shrewd negotiations, her relentless attention to detail. Frank's contribution was his name on the company letterhead, his charming smile at public events, and his practiced ability to take all the credit. He built the perception. I built the reality. And I let him. For 40 years, I let him. I believed it was part of the deal. The public glory for him, the quiet satisfaction and financial security for me. I chose the role of the silent partner, the power behind the throne, telling myself that it was enough to be truly respected by the few who mattered: the bankers, the real estate lawyers, the actual contractors who knew the truth. I believed my value was implicit, understood, unshakable. Now, as I sat in the study, the dark room, a testament to my years of invisible labor, I understood the true cost of that choice. My silence, my willingness to cede public credit, had not earned me respect from Frank and Lucy. It had made me vulnerable. It had made me a target. They had seen not the architect of a multi-million-dollar empire, but the passive, aging wife. A purse to be emptied, a legacy to be seized. They were about to learn how wrong they were. My hands, which had meticulously drawn up blueprints, signed contracts, and balanced ledgers for 4 decades, were now ready to dismantle their carefully constructed scheme. They wanted my fortune? They wanted to pass off a child of betrayal as their claim on my wealth? They had no idea who they were dealing with. The woman behind the fortune wasn't just a number cruncher. She was a strategist, a survivor. And she knew every single brick, every beam, every hidden cavity of the castle she had built, and she knew exactly how to lock them out. The mind is a masterful editor, skillfully curating our memories to fit the narrative we need to survive. For years, my narrative was that of a successful, albeit unconventional partnership. I saw Frank's flamboyance not as a cover for his lack of substance, but as a complementary skill. I saw his frequent social engagements as necessary networking, not as a diversion from the real work I was doing. And I saw the small, dissonant moments, the odd comment, the unexplained expense, the fleeting glance as insignificant static, easily dismissed in the grand, harmonious symphony of our 40-year marriage. But in the wake of Dr. Harris's revelation, my internal editor was fired. The raw, uncut footage of the past 2 years began to play back with horrifying crystal clarity. The static was no longer just noise. It was the soundtrack to a conspiracy, a symphony of deceit I had refused to hear. The red flags once waved away as mere trifles now stood as stark crimson banners on a battlefield I hadn't even known I was on. It began subtly, as these things always do. The first flag was a dinner receipt. I was reconciling the business credit card statements one evening, a task I had steadfastly refused to relinquish to Frank, much to his feigned chagrin. "Sophia, you work too hard," when I came across a charge for nearly $600 from Uchi Austin. It was a Tuesday night, a night I knew for a fact I had been at home, nursing a migraine with a cup of tea and a book. Frank was supposedly in Austin for a quick overnight trip to check on the property. "A $600 dinner for one, Frank," I had asked him casually when he returned, a playful lilt in my voice. He'd laughed, a smooth practice sound. "Darling, you know how it is. Had to take out that new leasing agent, show him the Monroe Properties hospitality. You have to spend money to make money." He'd kissed my forehead, and I, wanting to believe him, had let it go. Now I saw the scene with different eyes, the dimly lit, intimate ambiance of Uchi, the exquisite shared plates of sashimi and wagyu, the expensive sake. It wasn't a business dinner, it was a seduction. And Lucy, my lovely daughter-in-law, had a well-documented passion for high-end Japanese cuisine. Rob, my son, hated raw fish. The pieces clicked together with the sickening finality of a coffin lid shutting. While I was at home with a headache, my husband was wooing my son's wife on my dime, laying the groundwork for their betrayal in one of the city's most romantic restaurants. Then came the jewelry. It wasn't just the tennis bracelet and emerald earrings I'd discovered on the statements. I remembered a conversation a few months later, shortly after Rob and Lucy announced her pregnancy. I had been in their home, helping Lucy organize the spare room that would become the nursery. As she reached for a box on a high shelf, the sleeve of her blouse slipped, revealing a delicate gold and sapphire necklace I had never seen before. "Oh, that's beautiful, Lucy," I'd said. "Is it new?" She had flushed, a becoming blush I mistook for modesty. "Oh, it's just a little something Rob picked up for me. An early push present, he called it. Silly, I know." She'd quickly pulled her sleeve down, changing the subject to paint colors. I hadn't thought twice about it. Rob was a generous husband, and it was a plausible explanation. But now, the memory was tainted. I recalled a charge on Frank's personal American Express statement from a private jeweler in the River Oaks district, a charge he'd claimed was for a client appreciation gift. The timing matched perfectly. My husband was buying my daughter-in-law intimate gifts, and they were creating a flimsy cover story that relied on my complete and utter lack of suspicion. They were adorning her with the spoils of their treachery, each piece of jewelry a silent testament to their contempt for me and for my son. The whispers were perhaps the most damning flag of all, because they were the ones I had most actively ignored. Our home is large, the acoustics prone to carrying sound in odd ways. I would often be in my study or the kitchen and hear the low murmur of their voices from the living room or the patio. They always seemed to be in quiet conference, heads bent close together. The moment I would enter the room, the conversation would cease, and they would spring apart with a slightly too casual air. "Just discussing the baby shower plans," Lucy would chirp, her smile a little too bright. "Just getting Lucy's input on a new investment idea, darling," Frank would boom, a little too loudly. I had chalked it up to their growing bond, of father-in-law and daughter-in-law becoming close in anticipation of the new baby. I had even felt a pang of warmth at the thought. How wonderful, I'd told myself, that Frank is being so supportive. I had wanted to see familial affection, and so that is all I allowed myself to see. I refused to acknowledge the conspiratorial hush, the stolen intimacy, the palpable tension that would fill the room upon my arrival. I had edited out the truth because the lie was so much more comfortable. I now realized I wasn't interrupting family chats, I was interrupting strategy sessions. They were discussing me, my money, and their timeline right under my own roof. And the glances. Oh, the glances. How could I have been so blind? Across the dinner table during family barbecues, even at crowded social events, a look would pass between them, quick, intense, and deeply familiar. It wasn't the look of a caring father-in-law for his daughter. It was the look of a lover, of a partner in crime. It was a shared glance that said, "We know something no one else does. We have a secret. Soon this will all be ours." It was a look of shared ownership, of mutual understanding, and it was always followed by a carefully neutral smile in my direction, a performance for the benefit of the woman whose life they were systematically dismantling. I had seen it, registered it on some subconscious level, but my conscious mind had refused to interpret the data. To do so would have meant confronting a reality too monstrous to contemplate. It would have meant acknowledging that the foundation of my entire adult life was built not on rock, but on sand, and the tide was coming in. These flags had not just piled up. They had formed a mountain of evidence I had chosen to climb over every single day. I had willfully ignored the receipts, rationalized the jewelry, misinterpreted the whispers, and dismissed the glances. My denial was a fortress, built brick by brick over 40 years, designed to protect the fragile illusion of my perfect life. Sitting there in the deepening gloom of the study, I felt a profound, chilling shame, not for being betrayed, but for being so complicit in my own deception. They had been careless, arrogant in their belief of my ignorance. They had left a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to the heart of their lie, confident that I would never bother to follow it. The $600 dinner, the secret necklace, the hushed conversations, the intimate glances. They weren't just red flags. They were signposts on the road to my ruin, each one pointing to the same devastating destination. And I had been driving down that road with a smile on my face, convinced I was heading towards a beautiful sunset. The sun had set, all right, and in the cold, unforgiving darkness, I was finally seeing everything for what it truly was. The static was gone. All I could hear now was the clear, sharp sound of a battle cry, and it was coming from within me. Denial is a powerful sedative. Even after the avalanche of red flags had buried the idyllic landscape of my memory, a stubborn, treacherous part of my mind still clung to the wreckage, searching for an alternate explanation. It whispered insidious questions in the dead of night. What if the doctor made a mistake? What if it's all a bizarre coincidence? Are you really going to detonate your entire life based on a timeline and a few suspicious receipts? For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation, a ghost haunting the halls of my own home. I was impeccably polite, flawlessly composed, the perfect wife and mother-in-law, all while a silent, frantic war raged within me. I needed something more. I needed something undeniable, a piece of evidence so absolute it would finally silence that weak, hopeful voice for good. That evidence arrived on a sun-drenched Saturday afternoon in late May, delivered amidst the cloying sweetness of pastel-colored cupcakes and the forced cheer of a backyard baby shower. The event was held at Rob and Lucy's house in West University Place, the beautiful brick colonial I had bought them, a home that now felt like a gilded cage where my son was being held captive by his own ignorance. The backyard was a sea of pink and blue balloons, white linen-draped tables, and a guest list comprised of Lucy's chattering friends and a few of my own acquaintances, women who saw me as the matriarch of a perfect Houston dynasty. I moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, accepting congratulations, admiring tiny beribboned gifts, and smiling until my jaw ached. Every moment was a performance. Every polite inquiry about the baby's due date felt like a tiny, sharp jab to my ribs. Lucy was the radiant center of it all, enthroned in a large wicker chair decorated with flowers, her hands resting serenely on her pregnant belly. She was a natural actress, playing the part of the blissful mother-to-be with an unnerving perfection. Frank was in his element too, playing the proud, doting grandfather-to-be. He moved about the party with a proprietary air, his arm frequently and familiarly draped around Lucy's shoulders, refilling her glass with sparkling water, his voice booming with feigned joy. To the untrained eye, they were a picture of familial harmony. To me, every shared glance, every lingering touch was a scene from a horror film. I maintained my distance, busying myself with refilling platters of finger sandwiches and ensuring the caterers had everything they needed. It was a familiar role, the quiet, efficient organizer in the background, and it provided the perfect cover. I could observe without being observed, a silent sentinel cataloging every piece of incriminating evidence. I watched as Frank leaned down to whisper something in Lucy's ear, a gesture so intimate, so conspiratorial, that it made my stomach clench. Lucy laughed, a high, tinkling sound, and patted his hand. They were so comfortable, so brazen in their deception, utterly convinced of their own cleverness. The moment came, as such moments often do, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet, unguarded slip. I was standing just inside the French doors leading from the kitchen to the patio, arranging a tray of fruit tarts. Most of the guests were gathered on the far side of the lawn, engaged in a ridiculous game that involved guessing the circumference of Lucy's belly. Frank and Lucy, however, had remained near the house, believing themselves to be in a pocket of privacy by the overgrown azalea bushes. I froze, my hand hovering over a strawberry, as their voices drifted through the open doorway. Low and distinct in a momentary lull in the party chatter. "Everything is going perfectly," Lucy murmured, her voice laced with a smug satisfaction. "She doesn't suspect a thing. She's been so helpful." The word dripped with condescension. To her, my support was not a kindness, it was a symptom of my stupidity. Frank's reply was a low chuckle, a sound that had once warmed me but now sent a sliver of ice through my veins. "Of course she is. Sophia lives in a world of her own making. She sees what she wants to see." He paused, and I could practically feel the air shift as he moved closer to her. His next words were the ones that would echo in my mind forever. The final fatal blow to my 40-year illusion. His voice was a possessive, triumphant whisper, thick with the promise of a shared, secret future. "Once our baby's here, we won't have to pretend anymore. Our baby, not the baby, not your baby, our baby." The two words detonated the last remaining fortress of my denial. The sound of the party, the laughter, the music, the chirping of birds, all of it faded into a deafening, high-pitched ringing in my ears. The silver tray in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The vibrant colors of the fruit tarts blurred into a meaningless swirl. "We won't have to pretend anymore." The sentence was a confession, a mission statement, and a verdict all in one. It confirmed everything: the affair, the paternity, the calculated long-term plan to usurp my son's place, to install their child as the rightful heir, and to eventually cast me aside once my assets were firmly under their control. The pretending was their performance for me, the grand charade of being a happy, normal family, a play that would conclude the moment the baby, their Trojan horse, was born. My breath hitched. For a terrifying second, I thought I was going to be sick, that I would drop the tray and expose the entire sordid mess right there on the pristine green lawn. But decades of practiced composure, of being the calm center in every storm, held me fast. My spine turned to steel. I placed the tray silently on the kitchen counter, my movements measured and deliberate. I took one last look through the doorway at the two of them, still huddled together, their backs to me, completely oblivious. They were smiling. They were smiling at the ruins of my life. Without a word to anyone, I turned and walked through the house. I passed my son, Rob, who had just arrived from a weekend work trip and was laughing with one of his friends, blissfully unaware that his own father and wife were celebrating their victory just a few feet away. The sight of his happy, trusting face was a fresh stab of pain, but it also solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my betrayal anymore. It was about his. I slipped out the front door, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, only that I could not spend another second in that house, breathing the same air as them. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The carefully constructed dam of my emotions had finally broken, and a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated rage surged through me. It was a cold, clarifying fury. The sedative of denial had worn off completely. I was awake now. And the woman who had been so easily dismissed, so confidently underestimated, was about to become their worst nightmare. They thought the birth of their baby would be the end of the pretending. They had no idea it was about to be the beginning of their reckoning. Driving away from the baby shower was an act of pure, primal instinct. My hands were fused to the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the blur of manicured lawns and stately brick homes of West University Place, but I saw none of it. My mind was a chaotic storm of Frank's whispered words, "Our baby. We won't have to pretend anymore." The phrases echoed in the silent car, each repetition another turn of the knife. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the opulent familiarity of Houston streets, offering no comfort, only a stark reminder of the life that had been a lie. I couldn't go home. The house in River Oaks was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene, every room contaminated by their deceit. The thought of sleeping in the bed I had shared with Frank for 40 years, of walking past the silver-framed photographs that now seemed like props from a twisted play, was physically repulsive. I needed a sterile space, an anonymous refuge where the ghosts of my shattered life couldn't reach me. On impulse, I followed the signs for Uptown, my car moving on autopilot towards the gleaming modern spire of the Post Oak Hotel. It was the epitome of impersonal luxury, a place where money bought privacy and no one asked any questions. I valet parked the car, walked into the cavernous, art-filled lobby, and booked a suite on a high floor, using a personal credit card Frank knew nothing about. The suite was vast and cool, a symphony of muted grays and creams, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, glittering view of the Houston skyline. It was beautiful, soulless, and blessedly empty. I locked the door, leaned against the cool, solid wood, and finally, for the first time since leaving the party, I allowed myself to break. The breakdown was not loud or hysterical. It was a silent, convulsive implosion. I slid down the door and sat on the plush carpet, the sobs racking my body without a sound. It was a grief too profound for tears, a primal scream trapped in my throat. I mourned my husband, the man I thought I knew, the partner I had loved and trusted with every fiber of my being. I mourned my son, whose life was about to be irrevocably damaged by a betrayal so close to home it was almost incestuous. I mourned the loss of my family, the central pillar of my existence. And most of all, I mourned for myself, for the naive, trusting woman who had poured her soul into building a beautiful life, only to discover it was a house of cards built on a foundation of lies. For 2 days, I did not leave the suite. I ordered room service I barely touched, leaving the trays outside the door like offerings to a world I no longer belonged to. I sat in the dark, watching the city lights flicker to life and fade with the dawn, the passage of time marked only by the shifting patterns of light and shadow on the far wall. The television remained off. My phone, buzzing incessantly with calls and texts from Frank and Lucy. "Sophia, where are you? We're worried sick," was silenced and tossed into a drawer. Their feigned concern was more insulting than their crime. In that self-imposed isolation, I allowed myself to feel the full, unadulterated weight of the pain. I let the waves of anger, sorrow, and humiliation wash over me, each one threatening to pull me under. But as the third day dawned, something began to shift. The crushing weight of grief started to feel less like an anchor drowning me and more like a stone at the bottom of a clear, cold well. The emotional tempest began to subside, leaving behind not emptiness, but a hard, crystalline clarity. The woman who had built a $30 million empire, brick by painful brick, was not a victim. She had been betrayed, yes. She had been a fool, yes. But she was not, and would never be, helpless. The same meticulous, strategic mind that had navigated complex zoning laws and ruthless contract negotiations began to stir from its grief-induced slumber. The pain was still there. A hot coal in my chest, but it was now fuel. Resolve settled in, cold and absolute. I was done mourning. It was time to act. I retrieved my phone from the drawer. The screen lit up with dozens of missed calls and worried texts. I ignored them all, my thumb scrolling through my contacts until it found the one I needed, Rob. He was in Dallas for the week, closing a major deal for his firm, a fact I was certain Frank and Lucy had counted on, giving them space for their own machinations. My hand was steady as I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Mom, thank God, where have you been? Dad and Lucy have been going out of their minds. I was about to file a missing persons report." I took a deep breath, marshaling my strength. "Rob, I'm fine. I'm at a hotel. I needed some time to think, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you sitting down? Are you alone?" The tone of my voice, stripped of all warmth and familiarity, immediately silenced his frantic questions. "Yes," he said, his voice now low and serious. "I'm in my office. What's going on?" There was no gentle way to do this, no way to soften the blow. To protect him from the truth would be to participate in the lie, and I was done with lies. "I have something to tell you about Lucy and the baby," I began, my voice a calm, level instrument of destruction. "And about your father." I laid it all out for him, a brutal forensic accounting of the facts. I started with the visit to Dr. Harris, the medical certainty of the fetal measurements. I gave him the conception dates March 10th to March 15th. I reminded him, his memory surely not needing the jog, of his business trip to Singapore, providing the exact dates of his departure and return. I didn't editorialize. I didn't cry. I simply presented the cold, irrefutable medical facts and dates, letting them land with their own devastating weight. There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his sharp, ragged intake of breath. I could picture him in his sleek Dallas office, the world tilting on its axis, the foundations of his own life crumbling just as mine had. "No," he finally whispered, the word hollow, broken. "No, Mom, that's impossible. There has to be a mistake." It was the same denial I had wrestled with, the mind's first line of defense against an unbearable truth. "There is no mistake, Rob," I said, my voice gentle but firm. I confirmed the details. "Your father was home that entire week." Another silence, this one heavier, darker. I could hear the gears of his own memory turning, recontextualizing 100 small moments, 100 odd interactions he had likely dismissed. He started, his voice cracking. "I can't believe it. Dad and Lucy." The names hung in the air between us, poisoned. I know this is a shock, I continued, pressing forward before his grief could paralyze him. We didn't have the luxury of falling apart. But we have to be smart about this. We cannot let them know that we know. Not yet. What do you mean? He asked, his voice a raw mix of pain and confusion. I'm going to call her right now. I'm going to call him. No, I said, my voice sharp, commanding. You will do nothing of the sort. You will act as if everything is normal. That is the most important thing right now. They are arrogant, and their arrogance is our advantage. They believe we are fools. We must let them continue to believe that. I let that sink in before I played my first, most crucial card. Rob, I said, my voice dropping lower, they are not just having an affair. This is about money. This is about the estate. They are trying to secure a claim on everything I've built. But everything is co-owned, isn't it? He asked, the practical, business-minded part of him trying to find purchase in the chaos. Dad always said. A small, grim smile touched my lips. Your father says many things, I said. And with that, I began to explain the true nature of the empire he thought he understood, and the hidden leverage that was about to become their undoing. The awakening in the hotel suite was over. The war had just begun. Your father says many things, I repeated, letting the words hang in the charged silence between Houston and Dallas. I could hear Rob's ragged breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of a man trying to process a betrayal that defied comprehension. His world had been upended, his trust in his father and his wife annihilated in a single brutal phone call. Now, I had to arm him. I had to replace his shock and grief with strategy and strength. Rob, the image your father has projected for 40 years, the image of him as the head of Monroe Properties, the visionary, the sole architect of our wealth, is a carefully crafted fiction. It's a story he told so often, he likely believes it himself. But it's not the truth. I leaned back in the plush armchair in my hotel suite, the Houston skyline a glittering, indifferent backdrop. It was time to reveal a secret I had kept for our entire marriage, a piece of foresight that was about to become our most powerful weapon. You remember your grandfather? My father, I began, my voice steady. He wasn't a flashy man. He was a farmer, a builder, a man who believed in the tangible things, soil, wood, and the integrity of a person's name on a piece of paper. He trusted love, but he had a healthy respect for the fallibility of human nature. When I married your father, my dad gave me two things, his blessing and a piece of advice I never forgot. I paused, letting the memory surface, as clear and potent as the day he'd spoken the words. We were standing in the dusty yard of his farmhouse, the Texas sun beating down, the day before my wedding. He'd taken my hands in his grip calloused, but gentle. Sophia, he'd said, his eyes serious, Frank is a good man, full of charm and big dreams. But dreams are like the wind, they can change direction without warning. You are the rock. You are the one who understands how things are truly built, from the foundation up. When you start building your life, your business, your fortune, never put every title in your spouse's name. Keep your name, your soul, and legal ownership on the cornerstones. A partnership is built on trust, but true strength is built on having a foundation that no storm can wash away, not even one that comes from inside your own house. Rob was silent, absorbing the weight of our grandfather's words across the decades. For 40 years, Rob, I honored that advice. I continued. While your father handled the public-facing aspects of the business, the networking, the lunches, the golf games he called client relations, I handled the structure. I handled the acquisitions, the financing, the legal framework. He was the face of the company, but I was its legal and operational spine. He handled the day-to-day errands, the superficial tasks that made him feel in control. But the core properties, the ones that form the very heart of our $30 million portfolio, are not in his name. They are not in a joint trust. They are deeded solely to me, Sophia Ann Monroe. The silence on the line was now one of stunned comprehension. The mixed-use building in Austin, I said, ticking them off like a general listing her fortifications. The entire portfolio of rental homes in the Woodlands, the apartment complex in San Antonio. I structured the purchases through a series of shell corporations and holding companies that I alone control. The final deeds of sale, the recorded filings with the county clerks in Travis, Montgomery, and Bexar counties, they all bear one signature as the sole proprietor, mine. This was the hidden leverage. Frank, in his arrogance and monumental self-regard, had never bothered to look too deeply into the paperwork. He saw the quarterly profit reports I prepared for him, saw the money flowing into the accounts he had access to, and simply assumed his name was on everything, that his control was absolute. He was so caught up in playing the role of the real estate mogul that he never bothered to check if he actually owned the stage he was performing on. He has access to the operating accounts, which he has been skimming from. I'm sure, I explained, my voice cold with a certainty that had been growing for weeks. But he cannot sell a single brick. He cannot leverage a single property. He cannot transfer a single title, because he legally owns nothing. I control the originals. The notarized hard copies are locked in a safe deposit box he doesn't know exists. And more importantly, I control the recorded filings, the public records that are the ultimate arbiter of ownership. I could hear a shift in Rob's breathing, from the ragged gasps of a victim to the sharper, more focused breaths of a strategist. The son of his father might have been a dreamer, but the son of his mother was a pragmatist. My God, Mom, he breathed, a note of awe creeping into his voice. I had no idea. No one did, I said. That was the point. It was my fail-safe. A contingency plan for a disaster I prayed would never happen. But it has happened, Rob, and now we will use it. I let the reality of our position settle in. Frank and Lucy were operating under a fatal illusion of power. They believed they were on the verge of inheriting a kingdom, when in fact they were squatters in a castle whose queen they had just tried to overthrow. Their unborn child was not a claim ticket to a fortune. It was a bastard born of a plot that was destined to fail because it was based on a fundamentally flawed premise that I was a powerless, naive old woman. So, what do we do? Rob asked, his voice now devoid of hesitation. The shock had been cauterized by the cold, hard reality of legal and financial leverage. He was with me. We do nothing for now, I instructed, beginning to lay out the first steps of our counteroffensive. We play our parts. You come home from Dallas. You continue to be the loving, unsuspecting husband. I will return home from my retreat, and I will be the concerned, slightly flustered wife. We will give them no reason to believe anything has changed. We will let them get more comfortable, more arrogant, more careless. We will let them walk deeper into their own trap. I could feel his mind working, processing the strategy. We let them think they're winning. Precisely, I affirmed, because while they're busy celebrating their supposed victory, we will be quietly and systematically dismantling their entire world, piece by legal piece. And Rob, I added, my voice dropping, there's one more thing. A final layer of protection. This was a secret even deeper than the property deeds, a testament to my lifelong practice of quiet preparation. For the past 15 years, I have been systematically setting aside a portion of the rental profits before they hit the main operating accounts, small amounts consistently funneled into a completely separate private reserve. Your father sees the net profits, but he never saw the gross. He has no idea this fund exists. It's my contingency fund, my war chest. How much? Rob asked, his voice a whisper. Enough, I said. About $2 million in cash equivalents, liquid, accessible, and completely off the books as far as your father is concerned. It's the money that will allow us to operate, to hire the right people, to fight this without them ever seeing it coming. It's the money that will fund our victory. The last piece was in place. We had the legal high ground with the deeds. We had the element of surprise with their ignorance. And now, we had the financial resources to wage a silent, invisible war. The phone call that had begun in grief and despair had ended in the forging of an alliance. The 40-year illusion had cracked, but in its place, a mother and son pact, forged in betrayal and tempered with cold, hard resolve, had been born. We were no longer victims of their plot. We were the architects of their downfall. The hotel suite, once a sterile refuge for my grief, now felt like a war room. The glittering Houston skyline outside the window was no longer an indifferent vista. It was a map of my territories, a kingdom I was about to reclaim. My conversation with Rob had been the turning point, the moment my solitary resolve crystallized into a shared strategy. The pact was made. Now we had to lay the ground rules for the coming battle. "Okay, Mom," Rob said, his voice now a low, steady current of controlled fury. The broken-hearted son had receded, replaced by the sharp, analytical mind of a man who'd made his career in high-stakes corporate negotiations. He was processing the betrayal not just as a husband, but as a strategist. "We have the leverage with the deeds and the resources with the private reserve. So what's the first rule of engagement?" "The first rule," I said, my voice as calm and unyielding as a judicial ruling, "is absolute normalcy. We have to play it cool, and I don't mean just putting on a brave face. I mean a flawless, airtight performance of the life we were living 3 days ago. They are watching us, Rob, not because they're suspicious, but because they're predators monitoring their prey. Any deviation from our normal behavior, any coldness, any awkwardness, any question that's slightly too pointed will be a tell. It will alert them that something is wrong, and they'll either accelerate their plans or cover their tracks. We cannot allow that to happen." I began to walk him through the painful, necessary details of his role. "When you get back from Dallas, you will greet Lucy with a kiss. You will ask about her day. You will put your hand on her belly and ask how our baby is doing. You must be the doting, oblivious husband she believes you to be. You will sit at the dinner table with your father. You will listen to his stories. You will laugh at his jokes. You will be his son, the one he thinks he has so cleverly fooled." On the other end of the line, I heard him take a sharp, difficult breath. I knew what I was asking of him. It was an act of almost superhuman self-control, to feign affection for the woman who had cuckolded him with his own father, to feign respect for the man who had orchestrated this devastating betrayal. "Mom, I don't know if I can do that," he admitted, his voice raw with the effort of containment. "To look at them, to touch her, knowing what I know." "You can and you will," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. It was not a request, it was a command born of necessity. "Because your anger is a luxury we cannot afford right now. Your pain must become your shield. Every smile you fake, every loving word you force yourself to say is an act of war. It's a move on the chessboard that keeps them complacent and gives us the time we need to position our pieces. Think of it that way. You are not being a victim, you are being a soldier." I gave him a moment to absorb that, to reframe his agony as a weapon. "I will do the same," I continued. "I will go home tonight. I will tell Frank I was at a spa retreat, that my phone died, that I just needed to decompress. I will apologize for worrying him. I will listen to his lies with a patient, loving smile. I will be the devoted, slightly dotty wife he thinks is so preoccupied with her garden club that she couldn't possibly see the conspiracy unfolding in her own living room. This was our pact, an agreement to live a lie in order to expose a bigger one, a shared commitment to weaponize our pain, to turn their stage into our trap. We would be actors in the final act of their play, reading our lines perfectly, all while quietly dismantling the set around them. "Okay," Rob said, his voice harder now, forged in the fire of his newfound purpose. "Okay, Mom, I understand. We play it cool. What's the next step?" This was where my contingency fund, the private reserve I had so carefully built, came into play. This was the fuel for our counteroffensive. The next step, I said, moving from the emotional strategy to the practical tactics, is to gather irrefutable proof. The doctor's timeline is our cornerstone, but it's not enough. They could try to explain it away, create some convoluted lie, claim a miracle conception. We need more. We need to document their actions. We need to understand their financial maneuvers. We need to build a case so airtight, so overwhelmingly damning, that when we finally confront them, they will have no ground to stand on. They won't be able to fight because they will be buried under the weight of their own documented guilt. I had already spent the last few hours of my self-imposed exile researching, my mind working with the cold precision of an auditor. I had been planning this moment. I'm going to disclose the private reserve to you now, Rob, because you need to understand the resources at our disposal. As I told you, it's approximately $2 million in cash equivalents. This money is our secret weapon. It allows us to operate entirely outside of their view. With it, we're going to hire the best. Not just a lawyer, but a specialist. Someone who operates in the shadows. We're not just untangling a family drama, we are preparing for a battle over a $30 million estate against two deeply malicious actors. We need an expert in uncovering filth. I already had a name, a man recommended to me years ago by a trusted attorney during a particularly nasty tenant dispute. He was a name whispered in Houston's elite circles, a fixer for problems that couldn't be solved in a boardroom. His name is Jorge Ramirez, I told Rob. He's a private investigator, a former HPD homicide detective. He specializes in high-net-worth domestic cases, which is a polite way of saying he's an expert in exposing the secrets of the rich and powerful. He's discreet, he's relentless, and he's expensive. And with our private reserve, we can afford him without raising any red flags on the accounts your father is watching. Our mother and son pact was now solidifying into a concrete plan of action. Phase 1, the performance. Maintain the facade of normalcy at all costs. Give them no reason to suspect we are anything but their loving, ignorant family. Phase 2, the investigation. Use the secret funds to hire Jorge Ramirez. Task him with 24/7 surveillance of Frank and Lucy. We needed to document their meetings, their interactions, their shared moments when they thought no one was watching. We needed a visual record of their affair. Phase 3, the financial audit. While Jorge handled the physical surveillance, I would begin a deep forensic audit of every account Frank had access to. I would trace every dollar he had siphoned off. I needed to know exactly how much he had stolen and where it had gone. Phase 4, the legal fortification. Once we had the evidence, we would take it to a top-tier divorce and asset forfeiture attorney. We would prepare the legal documents for the divorce, for lawsuits to reclaim the stolen funds, and for eviction notices. Everything would be prepared in secret, ready to be deployed the moment we chose. We will not make a move until every piece is in place, I concluded, my voice a low, determined hum. We will wait. We will watch. We will gather our ammunition, and when the time is right, we will not have a messy, emotional confrontation. We will have a swift, surgical, and silent execution of our plan. They will not know what hit them until it's already over. I'm with you, Mom, Rob said, his voice a mirror of my own resolve. 100%. Tell me what you need from me. For now, I need you to be my eyes and ears inside that house, I instructed. And I need you to be strong. This will be the hardest thing you have ever had to do. But we will do it together. We hung up the phone, not with a typical familial closing, but with the quiet, grim understanding of two allies preparing for war. The pact was sealed not in love and affection, but in the cold, hard currency of shared betrayal and a common enemy. I stood up and walked to the vast window of my suite. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple. It was beautiful, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't admiring the sunset. I was admiring the strategic beauty of a battle plan, perfectly laid out, waiting for the dawn. My performance was about to begin. Returning home was like stepping onto a meticulously designed stage set for a horror film in which I was the star, and only I had read the script. The performance began the moment my car pulled into the driveway. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed my blouse, and arranged my features into a mask of weary contrition. Frank met me at the door, his own face a perfect caricature of relieved concern, his arms enveloping me in a hug that felt like a cage. "Sophia, my God, where have you been? We were beside ourselves with worry," he exclaimed, his voice thick with a fraudulent emotion that turned my stomach. "Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry," I murmured into his shoulder, the words tasting like ash. I was just so overwhelmed. I checked into the Post Oak for a couple of nights, just a little spa retreat to clear my head. My phone died, and I didn't even think to... "I'm so sorry to have scared you." He held me at arm's length, his eyes scanning my face. I met his gaze without flinching, offering up the image of the slightly fragile, emotionally overwrought wife he expected to see. He bought it, hook, line, and sinker. His relief was palpable, not because his beloved wife was safe, but because his asset, his mark, had returned to the fold, her suspicions apparently unaroused. Life snapped back into its horrifyingly normal rhythm. Rob returned from Dallas, playing his part with an Oscar-worthy performance of his own. He greeted Lucy with a kiss, his movement stiff but undetectable to her self-absorbed gaze. He engaged Frank in banal conversations about sports and the stock market. We were a tableau vivant of the happy American family, a masterpiece of deception. And beneath the placid surface of our daily interactions, our silent, methodical war was beginning in earnest. 2 days after my return, I made a cash withdrawal of $20,000 from my private reserve, using a small independent bank where my father had first opened an account for me as a girl. It was the first installment for our secret weapon. I met Jorge Ramirez in a quiet, anonymous coffee shop in the Heights. He was not what I had expected. There was no trench coat or fedora. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in a simple, well-pressed polo shirt and slacks, with a calm, watchful demeanor that seemed to absorb everything without betraying a single thought. He looked more like a history professor than a former HPD detective, but his eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. They held the quiet, unnerving intensity of a man who had spent a lifetime sifting through lies to find the truth. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the core facts of the situation, the timeline, the suspected affair, and the financial stakes. I omitted the source of my information about the baby's paternity, presenting it only as an unshakable certainty that I needed him to corroborate with tangible evidence. I needed proof of the affair and a clear picture of their financial machinations. He listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on my face, his hands resting calmly on the table. He didn't take a single note. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes assessing me, gauging my resolve. "This is not just an infidelity case, Mrs. Monroe," he said finally, his voice a low, even baritone. "This is a conspiracy to commit fraud. They are methodical. We will have to be more so." "That's why I'm hiring you, Mr. Ramirez," I replied. "I don't want emotional drama. I want cold, hard, irrefutable evidence. I want a file so thick with their crimes that it collapses under its own weight." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll need retainers, access to certain records, and complete discretion." My team and I will be invisible. You won't hear from me unless I have something concrete. I slid the thick manila envelope containing the cash retainer across the table. Be invisible, Mr. Ramirez, and be thorough. He took the envelope without looking inside and stood up. You'll hear from me soon, Mrs. Monroe. And with that, he was gone, melting into the lunchtime crowd as if he were never there. The gears of our counteroffensive were now officially in motion. While Jorge and his invisible team began their work, I started Phase 3, the financial audit. For years, Frank had been using a joint business account for the operating expenses of the portfolio, the very account he had so graciously offered to manage for me. In his arrogance, he believed I never looked at it anymore. He was wrong. Late at night, in the solitary quiet of my study, I would log into the online portal, my mind a cold, calculating machine. I began to build a shadow ledger, a secret accounting of his treason. It was meticulous, painstaking work. I cross-referenced every expenditure, every transfer, every withdrawal against the actual property management records I had always maintained separately. The picture that emerged was one of systematic, arrogant theft. There were hundreds of small to medium transactions, all disguised with plausible labels. Emergency HVAC repair, Austin, vendor payment, San Antonio, landscape services, Woodlands. But when I checked my own records, there were no corresponding invoices, no work orders, no tenant complaints. It was a phantom economy of lies. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to trace the flow of the stolen money. The pattern was consistent. The funds were being siphoned from the main operating account and transferred into a secondary account I had never seen before, one that was not linked to our primary business profile. It took me a week of digital sleuthing, but I finally found it. It was a joint slush fund, opened 6 months prior. Under both Frank Monroe's and Lucy Parker's names, she had used her maiden name, a laughably amateurish attempt to create a layer of separation. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen. The total amount they had managed to bleed from my properties was staggering, $800,000. $800,000 of my hard-earned money, stolen from under my nose, was sitting in their secret war chest. They weren't just having an affair, they were financing a whole new life with my fortune. The transaction history of the slush fund told an even more damning story. I saw payments for their lavish dinners, for the secret jewelry, for weekend getaways they'd taken while Rob was away on business. But the largest transaction was the most chilling, a wire transfer for $200,000 made just a few weeks prior to a title company. The memo line read simply, "Earnest money deposit." They were buying a house, together, with my money. A quick search of the title company's name and the date led me to public property records. My breath caught in my throat. They had put a deposit on a sprawling new construction home in a gated community in Katy, a perfect suburban palace for a happy young family. Their happy young family. It was set to close in late September, right after the baby was due. Their plan was laid bare. Secure the baby, use its birth as leverage to gain control of my estate, and then quietly move into their new life, leaving my son and me in the wreckage. Just as I was documenting this financial bombshell, Jorge Ramirez called. His voice was as dispassionate as ever. "I have something for you, Mrs. Monroe," he said. "A visual confirmation. They're getting careless. They're meeting at the Four Seasons Houston, downtown. Today, for lunch. My team is in place." The audacity was breathtaking. Not some cheap, anonymous motel. The Four Seasons. They were so confident, so certain of my ignorance, that they were conducting their affair in the open, in one of the city's most visible luxury hotels. "Document everything, Jorge," I said, my voice tight. Several hours later, a secure, encrypted email arrived. It contained a series of high-resolution photographs. My hand trembled as I opened the first file. There was Frank, my husband of 40 years, sitting at an intimate corner table. And across from him, laughing, her hand resting on his, was Lucy, The pictures were devastatingly clear. They showed him leaning in to whisper in her ear. They showed him feeding her a bite of dessert from his fork. They showed them leaving the hotel, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. And the final photograph, taken from a distance in the hotel's parking garage, was the one that sealed their fate. It showed them locked in a deep, passionate kiss before getting into their separate cars. It was the proof I needed, the visual confirmation of their betrayal. The foundation of our case was now built on the twin pillars of financial fraud and a documented affair. We had them, but Jorge wasn't done. He was, as promised, more methodical than they were, and his final move would be the one to turn their conspiracy into an open and shut case. The photographs from the Four Seasons were a visceral gut punch, a brutal high-definition rendering of my private nightmare. For a moment, seeing the images, the casual intimacy, the shared laughter, the final damning kiss, I felt the initial shock of my discovery all over again. The detached strategist in me faltered, and the betrayed wife gasped for air. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking, and took a deep, steadying breath. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for cold, hard analysis. These photos were not just evidence of an affair. They were a testament to their monumental arrogance. And arrogance, as my father used to say, is the chink in every villain's armor. I forwarded the encrypted file to Rob with a simple, 2-word message. Stay focused. He needed to see it to understand the depth of the depravity we were up against. His reply came minutes later, equally terse. Understood. Nail them. The shared pain had forged a bond of iron between us. We were no longer just mother and son. We were allies, united in a singular grim purpose. While I had been unearthing the digital trail of their financial crimes, Jorge Ramirez and his team were meticulously constructing a timeline of their physical one. He operated with the patience of a sniper, understanding that the most damning evidence is often not the single, explosive revelation, but the slow, methodical accumulation of seemingly insignificant details that, when woven together, create an inescapable web. A week after delivering the photos, Jorge requested another meeting. This time, we met in a sterile, anonymous conference room he'd rented by the hour in a corporate office building in the Galleria area. The place had all the charm of a dentist's waiting room, which suited my mood perfectly. He didn't waste a moment on pleasantries. He opened a sleek, black laptop and turned it to face me. Their arrogance is making them sloppy, Mrs. Monroe, he began, his voice a low, dispassionate hum. They believe they are invincible, operating in a world where you are a non-player character. This has been to our advantage. He walked me through what his team had been doing. They hadn't just been watching Frank and Lucy. They had been reconstructing their secret life. They had pulled cell phone tower data, cross-referencing their locations on days they were supposed to be apart. The data painted a clear picture. On numerous occasions when Frank was supposedly at a business lunch in the energy corridor and Lucy was at a yoga class in Montrose, their phones would ping off the same cell towers near boutique hotels and quiet, out-of-the-way restaurants for hours at a time. We have them together at Hotel Zaza, Hotel Granduca, and a half-dozen other establishments over the past 6 months, Jorge said, clicking through a spreadsheet of timestamps, bank statements, and hotel logs. They always paid in cash for the rooms, but they got lazy. They used Frank's credit card for meals and drinks at the hotel bars. The digital breadcrumbs always follow the cash. He showed me copies of hotel folios, obtained through a source of his, showing room service charges and mini bar consumption that corroborated their presence. It was a mountain of circumstantial evidence, each piece a single thread in the tapestry of their deceit. But Jorge was after something more. He was after their own words. People like this, he explained, his eyes as cold and analytical as a surgeon's. They feel the need to document their own cleverness. They write things down. They keep mementos. They believe their narrative is a grand love story, a romance for the ages, and they want a record of it. His next move was a stroke of calculated genius. Knowing that Rob and Lucy's house was a primary stage for their affair, especially when Rob was traveling, Jorge's team conducted a black bag operation. Under the guise of a fumigation company responding to a non-existent pest problem in the neighborhood, a ruse so banal it was brilliant. One of his operatives gained access to the house for a precious 2-hour window, while Lucy was at a prenatal appointment. "We focused on her spaces," Jorge said, "her office, her bedside table, her closet. We weren't looking for anything obvious. We were looking for the place where she would hide something she considered precious." He clicked to the next file on his laptop. It was a high-resolution photo of a beautiful leather-bound journal tucked away at the bottom of a designer hat box in the back of Lucy's walk-in closet. And tucked inside the journal, used as a bookmark, was a single folded piece of stationery. Jorge had a photo of the note itself, unfolded. The handwriting was a looping, feminine cursive, unmistakably Lucy's. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words, a venomous cocktail of greed and feigned romance addressed to my husband. It was a love letter of a sort, but it wasn't a letter about passion. It was a letter about a transaction. She wrote of their shared future, of the life they would build together in their new home in Katy. She wrote of her impatience, of her frustration with the charade, and then the final devastating paragraph, the words that would become the centerpiece of our legal case. "I know it's hard, my love, having to be patient, but you must keep her calm and happy for just a little while longer. Remember the plan. Once the baby is here, she'll be so overjoyed, so distracted. That's when you'll get her to sign the updated estate documents. And once the old woman signs the transfer papers, we'll finally have our freedom. Our real life can begin." The old woman signs the transfer papers. There it was. Not just evidence of an affair, not just evidence of financial theft, but a handwritten confession of their entire endgame. It was a premeditated, cold-blooded plot to defraud me, to manipulate my love for a grandchild into signing away my life's work. The note was their smoking gun, a signed admission of their intent, their motive, and their utter contempt for me. "We have a clean, clear photograph of the note and the journal it was in," Jorge said, his voice betraying a hint of professional satisfaction. "The original was left untouched, exactly where we found it. She has no idea we know it exists." I stared at the screen, at the elegant script that detailed my ruin, and I felt nothing but a profound, icy calm. The last vestiges of the grieving wife evaporated in that moment, incinerated by the white-hot fury of a woman who had just been handed the instrument of her enemy's destruction. "This is it, then," I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper. "This is the centerpiece," Jorge confirmed. "Everything else, we have the timestamps, the bank statements, the hotel logs, the photos from the 4 seasons. It all serves to corroborate this. This note provides their motive and intent in her own hand. Together, it's airtight evidence. No judge, no jury could look at this package and see anything other than a methodical, predatory conspiracy." He compiled everything into a single encrypted digital file. The timeline of their affair, cross-referenced with Rob's travel schedule and their own financial statements, the photographic evidence of their public meetings, the complete forensic audit of the $800,000 siphoned from my accounts, linked directly to their slush fund, and the deposit on their love nest in Katy. And finally, the crown jewel, the photo of Lucy's handwritten note, a perfect, concise summary of their entire criminal enterprise. The lovers' paper trail was complete. It was a roadmap of their greed, a diary of their lies. They thought they were writing their own triumphant love story, but what they had actually authored was a meticulously documented confession. They had handed us the noose, the gallows, and a signed warrant for their own execution. All that was left was to choose the time. The intervening months were an exercise in excruciating patience. Armed with Jorge's airtight file, a digital dossier of my husband's and daughter-in-law's treachery, every day was a performance. I was the loving wife, the attentive mother-in-law-to-be, a woman blissfully knitting booties and planning color schemes for a nursery that felt like a monument to my own desecration. I watched Lucy's belly grow, a constant swelling reminder of the cuckoo in my nest, and I smiled. I hosted Frank's dinner parties, laughing at his recycled anecdotes and feigning interest in his golf scores, all while imagining him trading his bespoke suits for a prison jumpsuit. My calm was not an absence of feeling. It was the absolute stillness at the eye of a hurricane, a quiet, terrible focus that held the storm at bay, waiting for the precise moment to make landfall. The baby, a boy they named Robert Franklin Monroe in a final sickening twist of performative honor, was born on September 15th. The call from the hospital came, and I played my part to perfection. I rushed to the hospital, cooed over the tiny, wrinkled creature in the bassinet, and congratulated the proud parents. I looked at the child, this innocent pawn in his parents' vile game, and felt a profound, aching pity. He was a victim in this too, but my pity for him did not and could not outweigh the imperative to protect myself and my true son, Rob. I held the baby for a photograph, Frank on one side, Lucy glowing deceitfully in her hospital bed on the other. Frank's arm was around my shoulder. "Look at us, Sophia," he'd whispered, his voice thick with false sentiment. "A whole new generation. We've built a wonderful legacy, haven't we?" I had simply smiled into the camera, a placid Mona Lisa smile that betrayed nothing of the Arctic fury in my heart. "You haven't built anything, Frank," I thought, "but I am about to tear everything down." We waited 2 weeks. We let them settle in at home, establishing their new routine, cocooned in the smug satisfaction of their apparent victory. They believed the final phase of their plan was about to commence. With the baby's arrival, the old woman was surely softened up, emotionally vulnerable, ready to be guided into signing over her future. They had no idea I was about to execute a plan of my own. The day of the reckoning was a Sunday. I had invited them all to our River Oaks home for a celebratory dinner. Just a quiet family evening, I'd told them on the phone. A chance for us to properly welcome the baby and for me to discuss some estate paperwork, just to make sure everything is in order for the little one's future. The bait was irresistible. The phrase estate paperwork was the magic word, the signal that their long-awaited payday was at hand. They arrived promptly at 6 o'clock, Frank beaming, Lucy looking radiant and self-satisfied, the baby sleeping soundly in his carrier. Rob was already there, his expression carefully neutral, a mask of calm that I knew concealed a maelstrom of roiling emotion. I had set the stage not in the formal dining room, but in the living room. It was a more intimate, less escapable setting. I served them drinks. We made small talk. We passed the baby around. The entire scene was a grotesque parody of familial bliss. Frank was in his element, holding court from his favorite armchair, pontificating on the joys of grandfatherhood. Lucy sat on the sofa, sipping a glass of water, her eyes glittering with avarice. They were practically salivating. At precisely 6:30, the doorbell rang. "Ah, that must be him now," I said brightly, standing up. I took the liberty of asking our family attorney to join us, just to make sure we cross all the T's and dot all the I's on these papers. You know how complicated these things can be. Frank and Lucy exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. "Perfect," their eyes said. "She's even brought the lawyer to us. She's making it easy." I opened the front door. Standing on the porch was Jorge Ramirez. He was not dressed as a private investigator. He wore a beautifully tailored charcoal gray suit, carried a slim leather briefcase, and radiated an aura of quiet, unimpeachable authority. "Frank, Lucy," I said, leading him into the room. "This is Jorge Ramirez. He's been advising me on our estate." Frank stood to shake his hand, all blustering charm. "A pleasure to meet you, Jorge. Good of you to come on a Sunday. We're all very keen to get things settled for the next generation." Jorge's handshake was firm, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Monroe," he said, his voice as neutral as a courtroom transcript. He nodded curtly at Lucy. "Ma'am." He took a seat in the armchair I had positioned directly opposite them, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him. The trap was now set. I remained standing. The time for performance was over. "Before we get to any new paperwork," I began, my voice clear and steady, all traces of the dotty, accommodating wife gone. "There are a few existing documents I'd like to clarify. There seems to be some confusion about the ownership structure of Monroe Properties." I walked over to the ornate credenza against the wall and picked up a thick, leather-bound portfolio. It was not filled with new signature pages for them. It was filled with their ruin. "Frank, you've always had a wonderful talent for painting a grand picture," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "But you've been a bit careless with the details. For instance, the deed to this very house." I slid a certified copy from the portfolio and placed it on the coffee table. "As you can see, it's held in my name, Sophia Ann Monroe, sole proprietor." Frank's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Well, yes, darling. A tax arrangement from years ago. And the mixed-use building in Austin," I continued, placing another document on top of the first, my movements deliberate, precise. "Also in my name, sole proprietor." I continued one by one, a steady rhythm of revelation. "The Woodlands Rentals, my name. The San Antonio Complex, my name." I let the title records pile up, a stack of legal fact that directly contradicted the fiction of his life. "You see, Frank, you don't actually own any of it. You never have." The color began to drain from his face. Lucy on the sofa shifted uncomfortably, her smug expression dissolving into one of wary confusion. "Now, Jorge," I said, turning to him, "perhaps you can share some of the other discrepancies you've uncovered in your due diligence." Jorge opened his briefcase and retrieved a slim tablet. Without a word, he turned the screen towards Frank and Lucy. The first image that appeared was a crystal-clear photograph of the two of them kissing in the Four Seasons parking garage. Lucy gasped, a sharp, strangled sound. Frank stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief. "We have a rather extensive collection of photos of the affair," I said, my voice as cold as a morgue slab. "Documenting your meetings at various hotels across the city over the past year. Shall we review the hotel logs next?" Before they could respond, I moved on. "But infidelity, as unpleasant as it is the least of your problems. Let's talk about the finances." I placed the printouts from my audit on the table, the spreadsheets tracking the $800,000 they had siphoned from the operating accounts, the statements from their secret slush fund, the wire transfer for the deposit on their love nest in Katy. Embezzlement is such an ugly word, Frank, don't you think? But I can't think of a more appropriate one. You've been stealing from me systematically for over a year. Frank finally found his voice, a sputtering, indignant mess. "Now see here, Sophia, this is outrageous. These are business expenses, a misunderstanding." "Is this a misunderstanding too?" I asked. My final move. I slid a large glossy printout onto the very top of the pile. It was a photograph of Lucy's handwritten note. "Once the old woman signs the transfer papers." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Lucy stared at her own words, magnified and undeniable, her face turning a ghastly shade of pale. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated panic. The predator, finally caught in the snare. "I believe the legal term for this," Jorge said, his voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision, "is conspiracy to commit fraud." The reckoning was complete. All that was left was the sentencing. From my portfolio, I produced the final documents. I handed a thick envelope to Frank. "These are prepared divorce filings," I said, citing adultery and financial fraud. "My offer is simple. You will walk away with nothing but your personal effects. You will sign over any and all perceived claims to my assets. If you refuse, this entire file." I gestured to the mountain of evidence on the coffee table. "Goes to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning." Then I turned to Lucy. I handed her a single sheet of paper. "And this," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, "is a notice to vacate the property you are currently residing in, as it is owned by me. You have 30 days to remove yourself and your belongings." They were broken, shattered. The triumphant conspirators were now just a disgraced old man and a terrified young woman, their brilliant plan in ashes around them. Frank slumped in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Lucy began to sob, not tears of remorse, but tears of a gambler who had just lost everything on a final foolish bet. Rob, who had been silent throughout the entire presentation, finally stood up. He walked over to the baby carrier, carefully lifted his son, my son, I corrected myself, and held him close. He looked at Lucy, his eyes filled not with rage, but with a vast, empty pity. "It's over, Lucy," he said, his voice quiet but final. And it was. The living room reckoning was complete. The storm had passed, leaving behind a terrible, cleansing silence. The aftermath of the living room reckoning was not a fiery explosion, but a slow, suffocating implosion. Their world did not end with a bang. It simply ceased to exist. Stripped of their illusions, their perceived power, and their access to my wealth, Frank and Lucy were revealed for what they had always been: hollow shells, defined not by their own merits, but by their parasitic attachment to my life's work. Their hard fall was a study in the brutal physics of consequence, a direct and devastating reaction to every one of their treacherous actions. Frank was the first to capitulate. The blustering, charismatic real estate mogul I had once known evaporated before my very eyes, leaving behind a deflated, desperate old man. Faced with the irrefutable evidence Jorge had compiled and the stark choice between a quiet, penniless exile and a noisy public prosecution that would land him in prison, his narcissism chose the path of least resistance. He signed the divorce papers the very next day in my lawyer's office, his hand trembling slightly, his signature a weak, spidery scrawl that bore no resemblance to the confident flourish he had once used to sign restaurant checks. He was a ghost in our home for the next 2 weeks, packing his belongings in a grim, resentful silence. The house, once the stage for his grand performances, now seemed to mock him. The custom suits in his closet, the expensive art he'd claimed to have an eye for, the rare cognacs in his liquor cabinet, all were just props he could no longer afford. He had been playing a role for so long, he had no idea who he was without the costume. His attempts at manipulation, so effective for 40 years, were now pathetic. He tried feigned remorse. "Sophia, I made a terrible mistake. I was a fool. Don't let one mistake erase a lifetime together." When that failed, he tried threats. "You'll regret this. You'll be a lonely old woman rattling around in this big house all by yourself." I met both tactics with the same unbreachable wall of silence. I had no words left for him. He had become a stranger, and one doesn't argue with strangers. The day he left, he stood in the grand foyer, surrounded by a few suitcases filled with clothes and personal effects. He looked small and lost. All the swagger had been stripped away, leaving only the weak, grasping man who had been at the core all along. He had been cut off from my assets, and without them, he was nothing. He had no skills beyond his charm, a currency that had just been declared worthless. The last I heard, Frank had taken a job selling life insurance on a commission-only basis. It was a humiliating, grinding existence for a man who had once held court at the River Oaks Country Club. He went from discussing multi-million-dollar property deals to cold-calling strangers, trying to convince them to buy a piece of a future he himself no longer had. He was forced to trade his chauffeured town car for a modest sedan and his sprawling mansion for a soulless corporate apartment. His fall was not just financial, it was existential. He had built his entire identity on my success, and without it, he simply vanished into the mediocrity he had always secretly feared. Lucy's fall was, in many ways, more precipitous and more tragic, for it also involved an innocent child. After the reckoning, she was a wreck. Her rage and disbelief quickly curdled into a desperate, pleading panic. She called Rob incessantly, swinging wildly between tearful apologies and venomous accusations. "This is your mother's fault, Rob. She turned you against me. We had a future. I love you," she would cry one moment. The next, it would be, "You can't do this to me, to your son. He needs his father." But Rob, his heart shattered but his resolve hardened, was immovable. He saw her for what she was, not a loving wife, but a failed con artist. He initiated divorce proceedings immediately, seeking sole custody of the baby, armed with the undeniable proof of her conspiracy and a DNA test that legally severed his connection to the child. True to the notice I had given her, Lucy was forced to vacate the beautiful home in West University Place. The moving truck that came for her belongings was a sad, paltry affair compared to the one that had moved her in. She was a woman who had surrounded herself with the trappings of wealth, but owned very little of actual substance. Her designer clothes, her expensive handbags, they all seemed like a hollow mockery in the face of her new reality. With nowhere else to go, she retreated to her sister's cramped two-bedroom apartment in Pasadena, Texas. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and genteel society of River Oaks. Pasadena was a landscape of refineries and strip malls, a place of hard work and limited horizons. For Lucy, who had tasted luxury and believed it was her birthright, it was a form of hell. The great love story she and Frank had imagined for themselves, the one they were willing to lie, cheat, and steal for, could not survive the harsh glare of reality. Without the secret trysts in luxury hotels, without the thrill of their shared conspiracy, without the steady flow of secret transfers from my accounts to fund their fantasy, their bond was exposed as a flimsy, transactional arrangement. Their clandestine phone calls, once filled with whispered promises and strategic planning, devolved into bitter, recriminatory arguments. Jorge, whom I had kept on a small retainer to monitor their communications for a short while, provided me with a few transcripts. They were pathetic. "This is all your fault," Lucy would screech at Frank. "You were supposed to handle her. You told me she was a pushover." "My fault?" Frank would retort, his voice dripping with self-pity. "You were the one who got greedy, that stupid note you wrote. You have the subtlety of a sledgehammer, you silly girl." Their great love curdled into blame. They turned on each other with the same viciousness they had once directed at me. Each was a living, breathing reminder of the other's failure. Their dream house in Katy was lost, the $200,000 deposit forfeited. Their shared future had been built on my money, and without it, they had nothing in common. They were two greedy, desperate people who had made a terrible bet and lost everything. I took no pleasure in their downfall. I felt no vengeful glee. Their self-destruction was simply the logical conclusion of their own choices. It was a pathetic, squalid end to a pathetic, squalid affair. My focus was not on their ruin, but on my own recovery and the difficult task of helping my son heal. Rob was devastated, but he was also resilient. He grieved the loss of the wife he thought he had and the father he once admired, but he did not let the grief consume him. He threw himself into the legal process with a quiet, determined focus. The custody battle was mercifully short. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her, the affair, the fraud, the DNA test, Lucy had no choice but to concede. Rob was granted sole custody. She was given limited supervised visitation, a sad arrangement that she attended with a resentful, sullen air. The baby, the innocent catalyst for so much pain, was now solely Rob's responsibility, and I, in turn, stepped into the role of a true grandmother. Not the deluded, easily manipulated one they had counted on, but a fierce, protective matriarch. I had been robbed of the joy of anticipating my first grandchild, but I would not allow them to rob me of the joy of loving him. The hard fall of Frank and Lucy was a necessary clearing of the ground. Their toxic presence had been excised from our lives. The lies had been burned away. And from the scorched earth, something new, something honest, something truly strong could finally begin to grow. The silence that descended upon my life in the months following the reckoning was not an emptiness. It was a vast, open space. For 40 years, my world had been cluttered with Frank's ego, his needs, his performances, and more recently with the insidious, cloying presence of Lucy's deception. Their dramatic, messy exit was like a controlled demolition. The toxic, unstable structure they had built within my life was gone, leaving behind a foundation scarred, perhaps, but solid and entirely my own, upon which I could finally build something new. This was not a conclusion, it was a rebirth. My first act of reclamation was a professional one. The name on the letterhead, Monroe Properties, had always felt like a lie, a brand built around a man who was merely a figurehead. It was time to make the name reflect the reality. One crisp autumn afternoon, Rob and I sat across from my attorney, the same one who had helped me draw up the divorce filings and sign the incorporation documents for a new entity, Monroe and Son Properties. It was more than a rebranding, it was a realignment of our universe. Rob, having resigned from his high-pressure corporate job in Dallas, moved back to Houston. The betrayal had shattered his old life, but it had also liberated him. He saw with stark clarity that he had been chasing a version of success defined by others, including a father who had been a fraud all along. Now he wanted to build something real, something tangible, something with his own name on it alongside the woman who had quietly been building it all his life. Our partnership was a revelation. Where Frank had brought only bluster and ego, Rob brought a sharp, modern business acumen and a deep, abiding respect for the work I had done. He would pore over the spreadsheets I had maintained for decades, his eyes wide with a newfound appreciation for the complexity and foresight of my management. "Mom, how did you do all this on your own?" he would ask, a genuine sense of awe in his voice. "I just did what needed to be done, Rob," I'd reply, but his respect was a balm on the old, invisible wounds of being taken for granted. Together, we became a formidable team. We didn't just maintain the portfolio, we revitalized it. We initiated a series of much-needed renovations on the San Antonio apartment complex, updating the units with modern amenities and finishes, which allowed us to increase rents and attract a higher caliber of tenant. We used my private reserve, my carefully guarded war chest, to refinance smartly, leveraging the low interest rates to pull equity out of the fully paid properties without overextending ourselves. We were investing in our own success, a concept that would have been alien to Frank, who only knew how to spend. We professionalized management, implementing new software systems that streamlined everything from rent collection to maintenance requests. Rob, with his corporate background, created new marketing strategies, building a sleek online presence for our properties that I, in my old-school focus on the bottom line, had never considered. The business, which had always been profitable, began to thrive in a way it never had before. It was no longer just a collection of assets. It was a dynamic, growing enterprise. Our first major joint acquisition was a bold one. We identified a mid-rise building in Austin's East Side, a rapidly gentrifying area ripe with potential. It was a bigger, more complex deal than any I had tackled alone. There were environmental impact studies, complex zoning variances, and negotiations with a dozen different stakeholders. But this time, I wasn't alone in the trenches. Rob was there beside me, in every meeting, on every conference call. He handled the financial modeling, creating projections that were both ambitious and rigorously detailed. I handled the negotiations, my years of experience allowing me to read the room, to know when to push and when to hold back. We secured the property for a price that made our competitors' heads spin. Walking out of the title office after the closing, Rob turned to me, a grin spreading across his face. "We make a good team, Mom." In that moment, I felt a sense of professional fulfillment that eclipsed anything I had experienced in 40 years. This was real. This was ours. We were Monroe and Son, a name built not on a lie, but on a foundation of mutual respect and shared hard work. But my rebirth was not confined to the boardroom. The silence in my River Oaks home, at first jarring, slowly transformed into a peaceful quiet. It was a blank canvas. For decades, the house had been decorated to Frank's tastes: heavy, dark woods, ostentatious art, a pervasive sense of masculine self-importance. It had never felt like my home. It had felt like his stage. Slowly, deliberately, I began to reclaim the space. I hired a designer, a young, vibrant woman with a minimalist aesthetic, and we began to systematically erase Frank from every room. The dark, heavy drapes were replaced with light, airy linen curtains that let the Texas sun stream in. The bulky, imposing furniture was sold and replaced with clean lines and comfortable, elegant pieces that reflected my own taste. I painted the walls in soft shades of cream and seafoam green. The house began to breathe again. It began to feel like me. My personal life, which had been in a state of suspended animation for so long, also began to bloom. I had always been defined by my roles: wife, mother, silent business partner. Now I was just Sophia. I started taking a Pilates class 3 times a week, marveling at the strength I was building in my own body. I rediscovered old friendships that had been neglected, enjoying long lunches with women where the conversation wasn't about our husbands' accomplishments, but about our own thoughts, our own passions. I began to travel, not to the flashy resorts Frank had favored, but to places that nourished my soul. I took a solo trip to Santa Fe, losing myself in the art galleries on Canyon Road and the stark, beautiful landscape. I flew to Portland, exploring its quirky neighborhoods and lush green parks. These were not vacations, they were pilgrimages. I was reintroducing myself to the woman I had been before I had subsumed my identity into my marriage. And I found that I liked her very much. Rob, too, was healing. He was a natural, devoted father. Seeing him with the baby, a child born of such profound betrayal, was a lesson in the transcendent power of love. Rob loved the boy not because of his origins, but for the innocent, beautiful soul he was. And I, in turn, poured all the grandmotherly love I had stored up into this little boy who had, in a strange, circuitous way, been the catalyst for our liberation. One afternoon, Rob and I were sitting on the newly recovered patio furniture by my pool, watching his son take his first wobbly steps on the grass. The air was warm. The sky was a perfect cloudless blue. "Are you happy, Mom?" he asked, his question simple and direct. I considered it for a moment, looking at the sunlight glinting off the water, at the beautiful home that was finally mine in spirit as well as in name, at my wonderful son and the innocent child who represented not a painful past, but a hopeful future. "Yes, Rob," I said, and the truth of the word resonated deep in my bones. I am. The hard fall of Frank and Lucy had been a traumatic, life-altering event. But it had not been the end of my story. It had been the violent, necessary prologue to the best chapter of my life. I had not just survived, I had been reborn. About a year after the demolition of our old life and the beginning of our new one, the phone rang. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was in my newly redesigned kitchen, the scent of lemon and rosemary from a roasting chicken filling the light, airy space. Rob and his son were coming for dinner. It was our new ritual, a simple, happy tradition that had replaced the tense, performative family meals of the past. I saw the unfamiliar number on the caller ID and almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. Hello? Sophia? The voice was thin, reedy, stripped of all its former booming confidence. It was the voice of a ghost, a specter from a life I no longer lived. It was Frank. A year ago, the sound of his voice would have sent a jolt of pain or a surge of anger through me. Now, it elicited nothing but a distant clinical curiosity. He sounded like a stranger, a telemarketer calling at an inconvenient time. "Yes, Frank," I said, my voice even, calm. I continued to chop parsley, the rhythmic tap of the knife on the wooden board the only other sound in the room. He seemed thrown off by my composure. Perhaps he had expected tears, or rage, or some lingering emotional hook he could still grab onto. Finding none, he stumbled. I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he began, his words laced with a pathetic, practiced humility. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year, about everything, about us." I remained silent, offering him no encouragement. This was his monologue, not a dialogue. "I was a fool, Sophia. A damned fool," he continued, the ersatz remorse dripping from every word. "I had everything a man could ever want, and I threw it all away. I was arrogant. I was selfish. I let that girl cloud my judgment." He couldn't even bring himself to say Lucy's name, casting her as the sole villain, the siren who had lured the noble hero off course. It was a classic coward's gambit, and it was utterly transparent. "I'm broke, Sophia," he said, finally getting to the point. The confession was a flat, humiliating admission. "This insurance job, it's a nightmare. I'm barely making ends meet. I'm living in a shoebox. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm paying for it every single day." There it was, the final desperate play. He was appealing to the woman he thought still existed. The caretaker, the fixer, the soft-hearted matriarch who couldn't bear to see anyone suffer, especially not him. He was appealing to the 40 years of habit, to the muscle memory of our marriage, where I was the one who always smoothed things over, paid the bills and cleaned up his messes. He believed that, deep down, I was still that woman. He believed my strength was merely a temporary phase, an angry outburst, and that my fundamental nature was one of endless, sacrificial forgiveness. He was wrong. "I see," I said, my voice still perfectly level. The two words were a wall of ice. He either didn't hear the finality in my tone or chose to ignore it. "I was just thinking, wondering, really, if you might find it in your heart to help me out. Just alone to get back on my feet. For old time's sake." For old time's sake. The phrase was so grotesquely inappropriate, it was almost laughable. He wanted to invoke the memory of a past he himself had poisoned, to cash in on a nostalgia for a life he had systematically tried to steal from me. He wasn't just broke, he was morally bankrupt, utterly clueless to the true nature of his crimes. He didn't regret betraying me, he regretted getting caught. He didn't mourn the loss of our marriage. He mourned the loss of my money. In that moment, I felt the last lingering wisps of connection to this man sever completely. It wasn't anger I felt or even pity. It was a profound and liberating indifference. He was a problem that had been solved, a chapter that had been closed. His current suffering was not my concern. It was not my burden to carry. It was not my mess to clean up. I stopped chopping the parsley. I turned and leaned against the cool marble of the countertop, looking out the window at the setting sun. My final lesson was crystallizing. A simple, powerful truth that I wished I had learned decades earlier. For 40 years, I had engaged in a silent, insidious trade. I had traded my self-respect for peace. I had swallowed my own needs to avoid his displeasure. I had accepted his credit for my work to maintain the harmony of our home. I had silenced my own intuition to preserve the fiction of our perfect marriage. I had paid a tax on every success, a tribute from my competence to his ego, all in the name of keeping the peace. But it had never been peace. It had been a long, slow, quiet suffocation. The quiet in my house now was not the absence of his noise. It was the presence of my own serenity. The peace I now enjoyed was not something I had negotiated or compromised for. It was something I had seized, something I had earned with my own courage. It was the peace that comes from absolute self-possession, and it was not for sale, not for any price, and certainly not for the cheap currency of a liar's feigned remorse. "No, Frank," I said. The word was simple, clean, and absolute. It was not angry. It was not vengeful. It was a statement of fact, a door being quietly, firmly, and permanently locked. The silence on his end of the line was telling. It was the silence of a man who had played his last card and found it to be a joker. He had no more moves left. "I have to go now," I continued, my voice gentle but final. "Rob and my grandson will be here for dinner soon. I wish you the life you've made for yourself. Goodbye." I declined the call before he could respond. I blocked his number. And then I turned back to the parsley, my hands perfectly steady, and continued making dinner. The ghost was gone. The haunting was over. As I set the table for 3, I thought about the journey of the last 2 years. The shock, the grief, the cold resolve, the silent, strategic battle, and finally, the rebirth. It had been a brutal, agonizing education, but the lessons were invaluable. And they weren't just for me. They were for every woman who has ever made herself small to make a man feel big. For every woman who has ever accepted the role of the silent partner in her own life. For every woman who has been told in 1,000 subtle and not so subtle ways that her competence is a threat and her silence is a virtue. My message, the final lesson of my story, is this: reclaim your name on the titles, on the deeds, on the bank accounts. Do not allow your identity to be subsumed into a partnership. Be a partner, yes, but be a sovereign entity first. Reclaim your choices, your choice of how to live, how to decorate your home, how to spend your time. Do not cede these small, essential territories of the self in the name of keeping the peace. True peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of your own uncompromised soul. Reclaim your accounts. Know your finances. Understand where every dollar comes from and where every dollar goes. Financial literacy is not a chore. It is the bedrock of female independence. A man is not a financial plan, and most importantly, reclaim your future. It belongs to you and you alone. Do not entrust it to anyone else. Build it with your own hands, guard it with your own strength, and live it on your own terms. The doorbell rang, and I went to greet my son and my beautiful grandson, my heart full, my conscience clear. The life I was living was not one I had inherited or been given. It was one I had fought for, one I had built, and one I had reclaimed. And my final, most important message to anyone who might hear my story is the one I now knew to be the absolute truth. It's never too late. This story is a testament to the quiet strength that lies dormant in the face of betrayal. It's a reminder that true power isn't about public accolades, but about the silent, meticulous work of building a life on your own terms. Sophia's journey teaches us that it's never too late to reclaim your name, your assets, and your future. The most profound betrayals can ignite the fiercest rebirths. Your silence can be your greatest weapon, and self-respect is the one asset you should never trade away. True peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of yourself. Now, if you liked this story, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and tell me which part surprised you the most. Each subscription and comment from you is a great motivation for us to keep sharing more meaningful things in life. Thank you very much.